It's David Seeley here, the Director of Strategy and Growth at CACI. I am pleased to be joined by John Eade. We're going to have a bit of a conversation today about technology and trends in technology as well. But John, to kick off, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, certainly. So I'm Jonathan Eade. I'm Director of Managed Services here at CACI. I've only been here a month, and obviously we're all locked in, so I actually only spent 7 days in the office before actually being sent to work from home, which has been an interesting experience. Before CACI, I have a number of roles. So previous to this, I led a development team and also ran significant MarTech implementations and consultant projects for a company called Engine Group. Previous to that, I've had a number of roles. I've led some analytics team and dev teams before. Previous to all of that, I was a developer myself.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so proper techie background there.
Yes, very much so.
Now, the event was going to be on the 1st of April, which is today. We didn't have you down on the speakers list because you hadn't joined us at this point when we were planning it. However, be very interested in talking to you because obviously you have some good views on what's changing technology and what might be coming next. One of the questions I guess to ask is what got you over to CACI? What brought you over to us?
Well, lots of reasons. I think CACI is a well-known, well-established name in the industry. Record. What's impressed me about CACI, and one of the reasons I joined, is there are wide-ranging skills and expertise in a lot of areas, and the maturity of the company, whilst also coupled with the fact that they are, well, we are, I should say, so receptive to change and innovation, was very, very powerful for me. So I wanted to join a company which was established in the industry, had a good name, but also was aware they needed to evolve and to change. So there's lots of things about CACI that were very, very tempting.
Yeah, it's been great to have you on board. It's just a shame that we've really only seen you in the office, and every meeting is like this over the web chat. Yeah. I guess one of the points of the next digital decade was to take a look back at what some of those trends were that have come before us in the 10 years from 2010 onwards, and then to take a look forward. So first of all, that question is, what changes have you seen in the last 10 years or so that have been quite transformative for business?
Well, I think there's quite a few things. I think obviously the growth of MarTech has been substantial, especially over the last sort of 5 years or so, and it's enabled brands to have a level of complexity in the way they do marketing they've never had before. I think coupled with that, the skills and the experience of teams has grown, almost exponentially over the last sort of 4 or 5 years. The sort of skills that we used to see sort of 10 years ago have evolved so much, having dedicated data scientists and data engineers and types of works that brands are now capable of doing in-house, and also leveraging the skills of companies like CACI has been quite remarkable. I think personally, from a tech point of view, from a development point of view, over the last sort of 2 to 3 years, some of the main innovations I've seen, which I think have been transformational, not all for the good, things like service computing, obviously has been a huge game changer for me over the last sort of year and a half, and I think it will continue to change the way tech teams are built and the way tech teams are organized over the next sort of 4 or 5 years. Storage obviously has become very, very cheap over the last sort of 2 years, and I think that has changed the way we think about data and the way we harness data, and I think in many respects that has been, in some respects, a bad thing. Scalable compute will continue to be a massive game changer, I think, for companies. I think the way we can look at what is important for us and how we want to scale compute, what we should be spending money on, what we shouldn't be spending money on, will change the capabilities and the things we are able to do, especially in the space of things like AI and ML, for example. More from a MarTech perspective and the architecture that supports that, Headless Architecture, which allows more of a microservices approach to building MarTech stacks. I don't think we've truly seen the value of that yet, but I think that will become an emerging change in the way we perceive or the way we build our architecture going forward.
Okay, the couple of things I just want to draw out from that. So we're talking about transformational changes here, and you talked about like mass data storage and how much cheaper that's become, and how we've started to rethink about data storage. You did say that that's not always been a good thing, or has it sometimes been a bad thing? I think is the wording you said there.
Yeah.
Why has that been a bad thing? We're just storing too much crap that's of little value. Is that the issue?
I'm not saying it's always a bad thing, but what I think we've got it. I think in some places we got into our minds that large amounts of data is synonymous with high value, which it isn't. And I think what we've got to a point of, because data is so cheap to store, people are almost hoarding data without actually having to take a step back, think about what data is valuable to them, and then implement or activate the data that's valuable to them. So I think we have got this, in some places, got to this point where we think we just need to collect as much data as possible without actually thinking what is the value of the data we are collecting.
Yeah, it's quantity over quality.
Yeah,
so.
And we've never really had to have that choice before. Up to 3 years ago, we really had to be quite conscious about what we were storing and how long we're storing it for. But now we can just store everything.
Yeah, just dump it all in there and we'll figure it out later.
Yeah,
maybe that's the wrong way around still. You also, I'm very aware that sometimes people from less technical backgrounds may be listening to these interviews, and you mentioned headless architecture and microservices in there. So wondered if you could perhaps elaborate or simplify that for me, for my benefit, if anybody else is.
Yeah, certainly. So headless architecture, the way we think about it. So let's think about your kind of traditional MarTech and the way it's integrated into, let's say, your SCV or your CDP. Most often, the SCV or the CDP will be pushing data to MarTech. So the MarTech will be storing its own version of that data in several different places. Where they are storing their own data, where they have their own schema and database, it can make it more difficult to kind of swap out kit as you go. So headless architecture kind of works the other way around. So MarTech is sat there and it's requesting data from the data repository, even the SCV or the CDP. Why that, in my opinion, is better, not only from a data regulation, data security point of view, or lessening the amount of data that's going around your organization, but also when you come to swap out MarTech, that integration should be a lot quicker because it's referencing data in one repository. That works very well in conjunction with microservices, and again, in my opinion, why I think that is powerful, means that your adoption to MarTech should be quicker and can be quicker. That means as trends move quickly in the industry, as which we know they do, you can respond much quicker to those trends by swapping out your MarTech a lot quicker without having to engage in a much longer drawn out implementation process. So it means your business essentially is more agile. There's sort of reduced business latency, as I like to say. You can make decisions faster and you can act on trends a lot quicker.
Okay, so in the case of a normal organization, they might have an email tool that has data on customers that's pushed into it, has its own repository of data and silo of data in the email provider, but then they'll have a DMP for controlling display advertising, and that then has its own completely different silo and structure of data that's pushed in there from source systems, and getting the two to communicate is very difficult, and headless architecture is going to help solve that challenge, I guess.
To a degree, I think DMPs is slightly different challenge because of the modeling techniques used within a DMP. So they do often need to have their own repository of data, but certainly with an ESP or kind of an orchestration engine or push mobile, for instance, push messaging, for instance, at the point at which you want to send that message, that it's requesting data back from the CDP or the SCV. So it's not really storing its own repository of data, which means that it's, the security is a lot better on that side, but also it means that if the point you come to swap out swap out the ESP, swap out that MEP, it's going to be a lot easier for you to integrate this way rather than kind of pushing out.
Yeah. Okay, and then this kind of leads and segues us nicely into this conversation of what could be next for technology and for what marketers are able to achieve. What do you see that's around at the moment, or even on the horizons? We talked about headless architecture and microservices. What else do you see on the horizon that you think is looking really exciting and something that marketers may want to start thinking about?
for me, something like Snowflake is a very powerful tool, and it's more to the fact that the architecture sits underneath Snowflake can be a bit of a game changer for me. So the things like the immutable data store that it has, but also the fact that we have clusters of compute means you have much less contention between compute when people are running queries, means that actually it's much more scalable, much more efficient to run. I think that is an architecture that's going to be much more widely adopted going forward. So for me, that from a pure techie point of view, that's very, very powerful. It means you're going to be able to do a lot more with, in theory, a lot less money, be a lot more efficient on your processing, and the processes will just naturally speed up because of it. So that's, for me, that's very, very powerful. Where I don't honestly believe that we have really, I don't think most brands have really embraced omni-channel marketing yet. No. Certainly not omni-channel marketing using a high degree of machine learning or analytics. I think we are still driven by sort of contact strategies rather than allowing computers to go and do their own thing. That will continue to be an emerging trend, and I do think the rise of technologies such as, you know, Thunderhead will continue, and I think we will see over the next sort of 4 or 5 years that being embraced a lot more. So definitely orchestration engines, being able to talk to consumers in, you know, that cliche of one-to-one, you know, hyper personalization will continue to be a trend as we manage to get it better. Going back to what I said before about headless architecture, certainly the emergence of headless architecture would enable that to be much easier brought into brands.
Yeah, okay. So definitely some trends emerging there, and I guess that trend of using AI and machine learning to define what's the right message at the right time, without necessarily having planned out a customer journey is actually a cultural shift as well as a technological shift as well. We've got to change both our technology, but also a way of thinking about the way our customers interact with us as a brand.
Yeah, very much so. And I think one of the things, a lot of the conversations I've had over the last year or so is speaking to CMOs, speaking to people in CRM, or about where does orchestration engines powered by machine learning, how does that differ from my traditional advertising? And I like to think about it in terms of sort of brand-led communications and customer-led communications. So customer-led communications being potentially powered by ML, being always on, responding to the customer in real time in a way that the customer wants to be responding to in that sort of hyper-personalized way. Whereas obviously you have the brand-led, the company-led communication, which are much more broad, much more reach-based. So I do think there is still that narrative needs to be built out in terms of how those things work together, and the two things don't, you know, the two things can coexist. They don't have to fight, they can coexist, and it's about being able to respond to the customer in the moment the way they want to be spoken to, but also having that constant pattern of brand-led communications about building that brand and the message you want to push out.
Yeah, and this is where we hit that point where technology transformation and business and marketing transformation have to kind of synchronize and meet up, and you know, that's part of the work we're all doing here, is to try and help those conversations happen and drive that change agenda, right?
Yeah, very much so. And sorry, I think underpinning all of that, there's the technological side, but there's the business structure side as well. So trying to move away to some degree from siloed teams focusing on just CRM, siloed teams focusing on sort of just acquisition or digital acquisition, and having a much more blended approach, having a sort of almost a data strategy that underpins all of your comm strategy that joins those teams together. Yeah,
and that's still proving to be a challenge for a lot of organizations. And I guess, you know, it's a lot of businesses using this period of time are kind of thinking about plans for the next period of time. And if you're in meetings with CIOs or CMOs, what advice are you giving them about planning and looking forward and taking advantage of some of this new good technology that's available?
I think often the conversations I've had, especially, you know, the last 3 years, we've seen a lot of big MarTech brands become very, very sort of household names, especially in marketing, things like Salesforce and Adobe. And not to say those aren't great tools, they are great tools, but I think often when you speak to more often a CMO rather than CIO, they view software almost as a bit of a panacea. They're going to
Right.
buy Adobe, or they're going to buy Salesforce. It's going to solve all their issues, which that's universally never really the case. So I think it's really, really important for brands when they are going into a change process where they're going to bring in new MarTech, especially if they're looking at enterprise solutions. They really need to define their data strategy and their customer strategy before that point. So the point they're bringing in and the point they're implementing these solutions, they need to be really, really clear about what they're using it for and how they're going to use it. And more to the point, those implementations those RFPs have to be use case led, because if they're not use case led, you often find quite a cumbersome 1 or 2 year implementation process, which when it is delivered doesn't necessarily deliver to the priorities the business has. So you have to have that data strategy with those use cases, informing the software that you want to buy, then informing the implementation plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the critical point with technology and marketing transformation as well is that it does deliver value to the business. That we can often afford to go into 2 years of waterfall style delivery to kind of make change happen. Have you seen a change in the way projects are delivered? Are we now more sprint based rather than waterfall? Is that happening?
Yeah. Oh, definitely very much so. Definitely very much so. I think a lot of people are being burnt by a lot of long implementations, and I've talked a lot about things like the dip of doom, where you are investing heavily up front for an implementation, and you only start to realize ROI off the back of 2 years. Because of that, I'm a massive advocate of agile implementations, sprint-led implementations led by use cases which are prioritized based on their ease of implementation, also in the value they deliver. And I think that in some respects supports why I'm a fan of microservices delivery, because you can implement things on bit by bit, so you start to realize value very, very quickly. If you look at sort of the average tenure of a CMO, it's not much over sort of 2-3 years, and so to go into a big sort of 18-month, 2-year MarTech implementation process is not massively comfortable for them, as it's going to take them a while to realise that value. So certainly, a lot of the work I do now is looking at how we can generate value quickly to then almost build a momentum internally for brands to say there is going to be a long-term change process coming. Here is some value we can deliver in the first 3 months, 4 months, and that will then help build momentum to make actually the much longer-term change process a lot easier.
Yeah, and for anybody listening to this interview, this is why we're very excited to have John on board with us, because hopefully we can use this input to reshape the way that clients want to deliver projects, because even though we may want to work in that way, sometimes we find clients still want to stick to very constrained point A to point B deliveries. And what did you call it? The dip of doom?
The dip of doom, yeah, the dip of doom.
Okay.
There's a bit of if you can imagine the constellation of the plough, there's a bit of a dip where you've invested all this money, but there's no value, and you kind of hit this peak at the end of it, where you've started to realise ROI after all your spend. That's about sort of 2 years after you do these big implementation processes. That's what we don't have. That's what we don't want to have. Yeah. I think with me, I think what I've seeing increasingly over the sort of the last 18 months is companies wanting to adapt and change into sort of this kind of agile approach, with being quite fearful or scared of not knowing how they're going to do it. So I think I've found a few times that brands are almost using MarTech implementations and almost having a sort of a co-delivery and a co-deployment methodology. So, companies such as CACI work in collaborations with in-house teams within brands to co-deliver and co-deploy in an agile methodology to actually kind of upskill them as you deliver. So I'm seeing increasing demand for people doing that.
Yeah. Okay. Now, John, I guess in kind of wrapping this up today, if I was a CMO in a brand, and I'm having you in to have a chat with me about priorities, etc., what's some of the best advice you're going to be giving me, and what can I expect to hear from you in those initial meetings or conference calls?
Well, yeah, let's hope it's face to face soon. What I think we've come almost full circle in some respects. I think sort of 3-4 years ago, a lot of people were talking a lot about unification of data, making sure that you've got a really clear, clean data asset. And we kind of moved away from that and looking at looking at how you can implement ML, how you can implement AI in much more siloed channels. And I think we're getting to a point now where we're trying to get both together. What I would say to CMOs and CIOs is that don't let perfect be the enemy of good. Let's work with what you've got. Let's deliver value quickly and build that use case. What I've seen too many times is long drawn out data unification projects which give you this perfect data set, but no one's actually thought about how they're going to use it. So let's think about how we're going to use that data asset. What data is the most value to you, how you can prioritize the data that you're pushing into your SCBs, how you can prioritize data you're pushing into your CDPs, and then use that to help inform your implementation process. But I think we need to get to the point where we're very, very mindful of the data which is of value to a business and what is of less value, rather than thinking that you need to have all of your data perfectly unified in one place.
Great, cool. Thank you. That's really good insight, and hopefully that'll lead to a number of people wanting to have meetings and conversations with us about how to transform their businesses. John, thanks for the interview today. We're going to be putting this up on LinkedIn for everyone to see and on the CACI blog. When all of the interview series is wrapped up, we're going to be combining this into a white paper of all the findings of research, so we'll be circulating that in due course as well. We have 2 exciting interviews coming up, one with Ed Sewell, who's Director of Data Strategy at CACI, and another with Gareth Ballard, who is responsible for Braze in the UK, and he'll be talking to us about how they see the changing world of real-time communications. So I look forward to hearing from both of those in due course. John, thank you very much.
Thank you, David.
Cheers.